we're at the point now where, in order to understand how the universe works, you kind of need God. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Mind Matters. On today's show, we are going to be tying up some of the loose ends left over from previous shows on subjects like intelligent design, mysticism, process philosophy, and really trying to get into the implications of the ideas that we're speaking, implications for, modern life, our ethics, morality, and also on the role of science and religion in everyday life, and how we've really been led to adopt false beliefs on the nature of science, the role that it plays in our life, as well as the role that religion plays in our life. Beliefs that we've been beat over the head with for numerous generations, such as the idea that science is incompatible with religion, and that science has proven that there is no such thing as God, and that religion is just a bunch of fairy tales. Because we know now that when science has started to approach these subjects, far from disproving the idea of God or the idea of intelligence in the universe that transcends human intelligence, far from disproving it, it actually makes it a very suggestive hypothesis, one that is becoming increasingly difficult to deny. And that goes back to this idea of false dualities that Bernardo Kastrup brings up in his book, The Idea of the World. The idea that science and religion are somehow binary opposites, like life and death, or on and off, when in reality, these binary opposites, like life and death, or on or off, in one state, it's going to tell you something about the other state. So if you see me now, you know that I'm not dead. And if you turn on the lights, you know that it's not off. Now, in the case of science and religion, it's clear that knowing something about one doesn't tell you immediately something about the other. You don't know that since I believe in some scientific theory, or if I believe in science or believe it has value, that it means that I'm not a religious person. So it's just a categorical issue, a thinking error, and a false belief. Because as we have come to discuss on the show with numerous individuals, there is a burgeoning worldview that is developing that incorporates some ancient beliefs in God and the traditions of numerous religions into a modern scientific and systemic system, a system of information and of energy, and they're not incompatible whatsoever. So today we're going to talk about some of the implications of this, the implications that this has for how we structure our lives, and what is the kind of a God that is coming out. What is the temperament of a potential God or creator that designed this universe? What role do we play as individuals in a universe built with information and with energy, all moving seemingly in some grand designed pattern, but with freedom, so that we can even deny that there is a creator or that there is meaning behind our everyday experiences? And what are the implications of this? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Guys, do you have any thoughts?
Well, I wanted to say something on the conflict between science and religion, and to take off on that introduction that you had about it. Because, as you say, in these talks that we've been having, in the interviews, we've been kind of developing a worldview where there's a lot of things possible that the scientific worldview doesn't allow as being possible, just writes them off as being impossible. But that doesn't mean that there's still, or that there isn't some conflict, or that there won't still be some conflict between certain worldviews, like broadly, like religious and broadly scientific. I think that if anything, when we look at the worldview that we're forming from all of these different sources, it's that it's kind of on the one hand, it's it's got several general characteristics and features about it. And the more specific you make any kind of claims, like if you zero in on all the specific religions to very like highly precise specific claims, I think the more specific you are, the more likely you are to have contradictions between the various systems, right? So every religion as it is can't be literally true because there are contradictory aspects of them. And you can see this played out in the conflicts that that real people have had over the centuries and still do have about the subtleties and niceties of religious dogma, even within a certain tradition, like the inter-Christian or inter-Islamic conflicts and battles that are waged. So there are probably a set of religious claims, broadly speaking, that can be falsified or that may not be true in a literal sense. And as a lot of believers believe them. And so basically there is, the way I see it, as we're forming this worldview, there are some principles from the scientific worldview that can be applied to religions and religion in general that don't necessarily impinge on the essence of religion, but that may strongly contradict some of some religions' central claims. If you read through the Catholic Catechism or something, I'm sure there are some things that might be assailable or that you could argue against and may not be literally true. But the flip side of that is that the religious, the so-called religious worldview can have something to say about science too, and the world in which science works and does its thing. Because a scientific worldview is kind of like a slice of reality that ignores and can't account for the whole rest of the pie of reality. There are aspects of experience that cannot be and haven't been accounted for and explained in the terms of, let's say, particle physics. Because there are some extremists who think that everything is reducible to the interactions of subatomic particles. And to anyone who, the only people that can believe that can only believe that while they're writing those papers, and for the rest of their lives, as they're interacting with their family members, it's completely irrelevant, and they demonstrate through their actions that they don't actually believe it. Because if you lived your life as if you were a collection of subatomic particles, you wouldn't actually do anything, you wouldn't think anything, you wouldn't have goals or anything like that. You'd be a pretty boring person. You'd be essentially a proton or a neutron. You'd be a neutron, totally neutral, not doing very much at all. You wouldn't have, you might have the excitement of the electron, as we were speaking with, was it Ken Peterson with John Buchanan. But it's a ridiculous worldview to think that everything can be explained in terms of subatomic processes, because as Ken Peterson was pointing out, is that at every level there is some kind of new phenomenon. There's a new set of rules. And you can't explain that set of rules in terms of the set of rules below it. Now, the set of rules below it allows for that new set of rules, but it doesn't account for them. Just like the rules of chemistry allow for the functions in your cells, allow for DNA and RNA transcription and all these processes that go on in your cells. But just looking at the laws of chemistry, the rules of chemistry themselves, there's nothing inherent in them that implies they will necessarily lead to, the emergence of life like that. There's an unbridgeable gap between ordinary, kind of, you could call it random or natural chemistry, and the kind of directed and organized chemistry that you see going on in every cell. And, doing these unbelievably complex actions and processes 100% of the time, and relatively flawlessly when you think about how long life forms live and how everything seems to work generally pretty well. It's like we're not constantly just dissolving into mush because things aren't coordinated. Even in an unhealthy body, things are going well enough that if you look at people who are sick, they're able to, there's a period of sickness. It's not like your entire body just disintegrates. There's some kind of stability in, amazing stability in the way our bodies operate. So we have a religious worldview in which we can place now the kind of scientific aspects, because the things that science analyzes, like I said, are a small subset of reality, And then you have this other subset of reality that part of which, not all of which, is accounted for the kind of traditional religious worldviews. And then you've got all the weird stuff that at one time or another has been like rejected by both camps. Like if you take mainstream Christian theology or just the mainstream Christian worldview, there's not a lot of attention placed on psi phenomena, for instance. And then if you look at the scientific worldview, there's not much attention at all placed on psi phenomena. They both reject them for different reasons, sometimes for the same reasons. But there are these aspects, these kind of like border areas where that don't quite fit in either of the mainstreams. And then there's all kinds of philosophical and spiritual ideas and beliefs that don't fit in any kind of mainstream religious framework. So right at the outset, I guess the main point I want to make about that is that we can adopt a so-called scientific attitude towards religious phenomena and not lose out on what we might consider the essence of those phenomena. So, I haven't come up with a list of what I might think those would be. I'm sure David Ray Griffin has, but in one of his books that I've read. But one might be so the existence and reality of higher beings, whether it be one supreme entity or more individualized, a plenitude or a multitude of beings like angels or archangels, traditionally called, or demons or jinn or whatever. So that might be one, and then there's also the kind of there's an implication or a something that is entailed by those beliefs, and that would be a kind of non-sensory perception. Because in order to contact and have some kind of connection with a being of that sort, if the religious worldview accounts for like a personal connection with beings of that sort, then there must be some kind of non-physical, non-sensory perception by which this connection is done. And so that then leads into thinking about the kinds of philosophies that we've been discussing, like process philosophy and like first sight theory, that in a scientific way kind of tries to describe and account for what that is, how it works, and how it fits into both a religious and a scientific framework. So there's all these, even though there are these contradictions in, let's say, method and content, there are these overlaps that kind of can teach each side, or round out each side of the equation. So a scientific worldview and a scientific like method and framework applied to religion can weed out a lot of nonsense, and you see a lot of this when you look at like biblical criticism and the analysis of Old and New Testament texts, where you look at it critically and you can come to certain conclusions and say, okay, well, I probably can't believe that because this is clearly nonsense. This actually didn't happen. Maybe it was written for a purpose. Maybe we can try to divine the purpose as we do with literature, but we can say, well, no, that's not true.
Well,
right?
Let me interrupt you, Harrison, because you said quite a bit there, and there's a lot that we can unpack from that bit and from Corey's intro. The first thing, Corey, you said in your introduction, that intelligent design implies the infusion of energy and information. And there is, I think, once one has come to at least a basic acknowledgement of intelligent design's influence over the creation of biological beings and environments, and in fact, its power to have created things on a much more macro or cosmic level, then implicit in that, I think, is the awareness of the idea that information as a almost non-physical substance, for lack of a better word, ideas, knowledge of how things work, that there's an interface between the physical and the non-physical in this universe that gets bridged, that gets informed, for lack of a better word, with information. There's a formation of structures, of cells, of DNA, of subatomic particles, as we discussed a couple of weeks ago in our interview with Ken Peterson. All of this comes from a place or a knowledge base or a higher intelligence that has seen fit to bring pieces together in a certain way. And once we've gotten this under our belts, so to speak, I think that what it allows for is an opening to a whole other range of information. Harrison, you brought up psi abilities and understanding of certain phenomena that might be described in religious texts. Scientists like Rupert Sheldrake have pointed to all kinds of phenomena and things that were observed that point directly to a non-physical reality. And so, to me, one of the implications of intelligent design in particular is that it's freeing. It allows scientists, it allows people who are religious of a scientific bent. It allows philosophers to open up whole vistas of inquiry, of real science and real understanding that's based on more objective truths. Now, before our show, we had a little bit of a discussion on all this, and I thought that one of the kind of best things that was said, I don't know if it was you, Corey, or you, Adam, was that we're working towards a kind of science of truth. And once we have this objective truth that everything is information, that everything can be seen from a greater distance back, that there are less accidents, less random mutations that go into the forming of things than the neo-Darwinists would have us believe. Once we've really understood this, then we can apply and allow ourselves to pursue a whole other area of non-physical awareness. It doesn't mean that we'll run away with ourselves and our thoughts in these certain directions. We can still be very rigorous, but at least from there, we have the veil lifted from our eyes. We can begin to be open to the idea of a hierarchy of intelligence, as you were saying, Harrison. This is very important because if you are a materialist, if you are a neo-Darwinist, then there is no purpose for prayer. There is no humility that one can bring oneself to in order to ask or in order to be open to non-physical intelligence, in order to be able to receive in the way that an Ibn Arabi would say, or a Gurdjieff with his exercises. So these are whole areas of knowledge and awareness and perhaps inspiration and information that we get to at least allow ourselves to explore, having unblocked our minds with materialism.
Yes, yeah. I mean, those are all really good points, and I think that that it makes me think of the choice. I mean, we have this choice, right? That you can be a materialist or a Darwinist, right? You can be completely materialistic. It's a problem that will never be solved, and there's something really, really important behind that. I think that even though, I mean, a little bit of the reason to bring up, the whole dichotomy between science and religion was because, it's tough to get to the implications of intelligent design when you're carrying the excess baggage of generations of people who you just, you've got the baggage from your traditionalist camp that, God is either this moralist busybody, or he's the upholder of the status quo, or he's just the source of power for the powerful. He's He's any one of these numerous things that is, very tribalistic and very narrow, myopic kind of God that is jealous and he's angry, and he needs you to believe in him, and that it's you have that, right? That's in the background. So you think, oh, intelligent design, oh, it's him. They're gonna, that's what somebody's gonna say is, oh, it's that guy. What you're really saying is that God, when you say God, that's the God you're talking about. It's like, no, what we're talking about is real science, which is simply the pursuit of everything, how it works, and just as it is. It's not you're not. I mean, science as it is today isn't that. Obviously, we know that isn't that, and that's why you make differentiations between the scientific worldview and scientism and science as it was originally intended, which was just basically a restrained method for making educated guesses, testing them, refining what you saw based on mathematics and higher order thinking in order to generalize into these intermediate laws that then could ultimately be generalized into ultimate laws so that you could understand how the entire universe works. Well, guess what? We're at the point now where in order to understand how the universe works, you kind of need God. You kind of need some form of God. But the God that we're seeing right now doesn't seem to care if all of you are materialistic swine. Not to say all materialists are swine, but he doesn't care if you're a materialistic swine either. He doesn't seem to really be that big of a moral busybody. There's an important component there that seems to be that one of the biggest things in this universe that we live in is that you're free to choose. That's really interesting right there, because that choice right there opens up, to me, in my mind, there's at least two paths that stem from that choice. And you see that in the universe, from what we see from the very lowest levels of, subatomic particles and information, everything is computing information, and things at the lowest levels aren't necessarily very free. Right? So they don't have a lot of free will. But as you move up, you have more freedom, less limitation. Into animals, you have different ways of expressing, a range of emotions and a range of behavioral features and a range of different relationships until, you get to human beings, and we have the freedom to deny all of that completely. We don't have to pursue the learning process or the computing process, or we don't, on a conscious level, we're free to choose not to do that. Whereas if, subatomic particles were free to do that, to choose not to do that, I don't know if we would have a universe. We would probably still be in that whatever pre-chaotic state. But so that freedom to choose seems to be something that you cannot violate. That God, and when I say God, okay, so we named the different kinds of gods that we've believed in for the last a couple thousand years or so. God is like this absolute, passionless, figure that just is somewhere out there, and nothing you do really does anything for God. He created the universe and whatever. He doesn't really care. And then, the moral busybody, and then the tyrant, and then the upholder of the status quo. It's like all of those conceptions seem to be wrong, because empirically, if you look at intelligent design and what it seems to do, it seems to be that it's a very active process. The material world itself even isn't dead. It's not a dead thing that just got fashioned like clay, quote unquote, and then we can walk on it. It's rather a very constant, engaged, creative process of information transfer that leads up to the level where we're at, where we seem to be able to choose whether or not we actually want to continue that. And so then at that point, it seems to be that there's at least two paths that you can go to, either, Shakespeare, to be or not to be. And I think that plays itself out quite a bit in numerous different ways in our lives. And I think that right there is kind of the foundation for a more, I don't want to say scientific, but a religious kind of worldview that is rooted in science and that takes away all of the trappings of like God and that have come down to us. And you can start, like you said, Harrison, start to take a scientific attitude towards the universe and towards religion and start to see like, well, if God isn't so far away, if, as in process philosophy, God is a very much an integral part of every conscious experience, and that just as like Francis Bacon said, that the divine mind is really like a big mover and shaker in the universe, that we're not that far from God. That we are part and parcel of God, and that our choices and our experience and then how we live our lives kind of reflect our relationship with God.
Like Ibn Arabi said, God is closer to you than the jugular vein.
Yeah.
That's there are 2 points I want to try to make. They're still kind of crystallizing in my mind, so I'm going to try to work through them. I want to go off on a couple of things, just brief references you made. One was just about belief in God and how one of these images, one of these traditions we've had about God, however conceived, was that he requires belief in him. And I think from a certain perspective, that is kind of an absurd notion that isn't really compatible with the worldview that we've been developing. But from another perspective, a more kind of elusive or kind of roundabout way, it kind of makes sense, because what I was thinking about was something that we were talking about just earlier in regard to psi phenomena. One of the interesting things that James Carpenter points out, and this is kind of a well-known fact in the parapsychological research, is that if you believe psi is possible, chances are better that you'll perform better at doing you'll perform better in these experiments that are set up. And if you have a strong belief that it's not possible, you might actually show a below chance response in these tests. So in other words, you'll guess wrong more times than you should by chance. So you're actually still demonstrating a psi effect, so to speak, but just in the opposite direction. So there seems to be something about belief that is integrally tied to all this. Now, what I'm not saying is, I'm not saying that if you believe that your dog is a cat, then for you your dog is a cat. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm trying to say, probably more closely, is that there are certain inherent possibilities or realities in the cosmos, in reality, that if you are aware of them and see them as real possibilities, they become real for you. They become real possibilities as opposed to just distant possibilities. Like if you never conceive of yourself as learning a particular skill or subject or whatever, then you'll never do it. Whereas if you say, oh, well, I could learn quantum physics, then that's kind of the first step in actually cracking open the first book or taking your first course and actually learning it. That dynamic seems to be at play in the universe in ways that are way weirder and more interesting, frankly, than that simplistic example. So with the example of psi, when you're aware of the possibility of it, when you see, oh wow, maybe this is the way the world is actually structured, maybe this is something integral about the nature of consciousness, then all of a sudden that kind of unlocks that latent potential within you that allows it to express itself. And it seems like that dynamic, that feature of the way the universe is structured, is somehow intimately tied to the nature of choice, as you were describing it, Corey. Because I'm going to tie this into information theory as we described it in our talk with Ken Peterson. Just a quick background on how I described information in that show was that as like Bill Dembski describes it and others, information is really the reduction of uncertainty. So when you take a vast unknown and reduce it to something that becomes more and more certain, the more certain it is, the more information it is. So if you have something and you can't say anything specific about it, you've got zero information about it. But you can say, oh, if it's this, not that. That's your first bit of information. And the more times you can do that, the more ways in which you can do that, the more you zero in on what that thing is, then you have more information about it. So you can say, oh, either it's raining or it's not raining. Oh, where though? Oh, it's not raining in Africa, but it is raining in North America. Well, where specifically? Those are big continents and land masses. So the more you zero in on it, okay, it's raining in North America, in the state of North Carolina, in the city of Raleigh, on this street, right now. The more you zero in, the more information you have, the more specific it gets. The less information you have, the more vague it is, and the more unspecific it is. And that is a way of describing information at all levels. So when we were talking about subatomic particles, there are specific features about subatomic particles that you can describe in various digital ways. It's on or off. You can have certain digits to describe spin or mass or velocity or whatever at all of these all of these features of the subatomic world up through the macroscopic world. You have specific features, characteristics that can be taken by any given object, and at those low levels, it's expressed digitally, like Ken Peterson was showing. It's a very limited number of options that describe the possibilities, and that we can apply that dynamics also to humans. So for molecules, for atoms, they have a limited number of options. Like you were saying, Corey, they have a limited amount of free will. They can't choose much. They can't do much because their options are so limited. Like when you have an atom, it's pretty much, and it's receiving a proton, it's got a few options. Oh, well, if it's this, I can do that. If it's this, I can do that other thing. And if it's none of the above, then I can do nothing. So it's got, any particular like creature or being at that level, whether it's a subatomic particle or an atom or whatever, it then has a limited number of things that it can do in response to the world. And as it becomes more complex, it has a greater range of things. So whereas a proton might not be able to choose to do one thing or another, you might be able to say it has a choice. You can either do this or not do it. And it just mechanically makes those kind of pseudo choices throughout its entire, hundreds of billions of years long existence. Then when you move up and you get to the level of animals, well, now they've got seemingly a greater range of free will. They can choose certain things. Well, let's start with like microorganisms, like single-celled organisms. If you put some food in front of them, they can sense that food through various means and then move towards it. And that in itself might seem pretty mechanical, because chances are in that situation, any individual of that species of microorganism will do the same thing. Oh, it smells the food that it knows it's like, it moves towards it and it eats it. But there's a tiny bit of freedom there. There's a tiny bit of, I'll just say freedom for movement, because even if it's kind of not much to write home about, it can take a slightly different path to get to that food. It can start with maybe the right side of its form or the left side, and it can veer slightly to the right and make a little spiral pattern, but it's not completely mechanical in the sense that it's just, every time it's this like robotic movement forward. When you look at anything that is living, there is a quality to even just movement that suggests life, and it's not a robotic movement. Like when you watch TV shows and old kinds of robots, they look robotic because they are robotic. And the more that we can kind of program them to imitate life, the more they look like life. But think about all of the information processing that has to have been developed in order to get like some of those, dog robots to actually look kind of like they're almost human. And look at the state of like androids. There's still a gap between actual like programmed movements and natural spontaneous movements. And I think that has to do with the degree of freedom that there is by virtue of having a mind that is controlling them. But animals are still extremely limited, like that, or life forms, early life forms, like that amoeba is just pretty much going to do the same thing each time. But there are going to be, it's not going to be as simple as a proton. It's going to be, okay, if you see food, then you move towards it and you eat it. But there might be conditions when you don't, because even microorganisms have the ability to learn. It might be tricked, right? So it might smell the food and run up against an object or a barrier that harms it. So it might try a couple times, and then it learns and says, okay, if I smell that, I'm going to avoid it from now on. It's not a totally do this or don't do this programming. It's do this, but if this happens, then do this. Already that's more complex than something going on the subatomic level. But then you get to the level of humans, and the free will kind of range of choices pretty much explodes. And that's why when you're looking at any kind of animal, you won't see a range of artistic styles and achievements. You won't see a variety of sciences. You won't see a wealth of literature or history or whatever. All of these things that we call human civilization would be impossible for animals with that limited spectrum of possibilities, of choices. So the more, summing up, I guess, the more simple something is, the less options it has for what it can do. The more complex something is, the more options it has. But part of the nature of what those choices will be has to do with the information you receive, right? So this brings us back to choices and the nature of belief, because the more you know about the possibilities inherent in the universe, the more possibilities open for us. So it's not like humans are stuck at one level where here are your possibilities, and you list them off, and that's what you're limited to. Because the more you're aware of those possibilities, the more possibilities open up for you. And you can see this just in any individual human life, how this plays out. And I think everyone experiences it and sees it on some level, even if they haven't put it into words and articulated it. But that's what plays out, is this expansion of possibilities. And,
so when you were saying that, Harrison, I was thinking about, and Adam, maybe you can add to this a little bit. I was thinking about the quote from the Bible, "Be as little children," or "Be curious as little children." If you recall where that's from or the exact phrase, that would be great. But if not,
I believe that was Jesus that said that.
Jesus himself. Well, the idea being, not to get all Bible, but to say that there is a level of innocence and curiosity that I think we benefit from when we look at all this information, and when we decide that we're going to allow ourselves to have the questions. Because I think as soon as human beings decide that they have the whole enchilada, that they understand everything, that essentially all the possibilities to a person close up, and if we're made up of information, if we have some kind of connection through our minds to a larger mind, a larger universe, a universe filled with information that we couldn't even possibly fathom in our current state of being. Unless we can get past the fact of our own ignorance, unless we can acknowledge our own ignorance and be more curious and open to the idea that we are ignorant, and what else does all of this information imply? What other avenues of thinking, of thought, of philosophy, of science, of spiritual study might we pursue in order to bring ourselves to this greater level of complexity, as you put it, Harrison? What what parts of our inherent nature that we've been dumbed down about through neo-Darwinism, through the programming of education and relatively ignorant thinking and societal norms, for instance. What barriers do we poke through in order to grow ourselves? But if you don't have the question, just like Parsifal with the lance in our show about panspermia, if we don't have that question, if we're not curious, if we can't get over ourselves enough to say, "Wow, this is," and this is really Ken Peterson's thought too. I think it's what made him such an excellent guest. He was exuberant with the idea that things weren't, out of the Darwinistic materialistic mold of thinking. He was exuberant with the idea that the world is made up of information, and that there is some intelligence that resembles God in his mind. And so this can be an energizing, revitalizing idea and pursuit for ourselves if we can get past this block that seems to be placed in front of us. And just getting back earlier, Corey, to some of your points about choice, it seems to me that true science has placed right in front of us at this time the choice more clear than it has been in a very long time. That true science is saying, look, all of this points to, we don't know exactly what it points to, but all of this points to the fact that we're no accidents, that the universe is no accident. So what is it about this choice that is so powerful? And do we happen to live at an extraordinary time on this planet where the choice is so apparent if you're looking at it? What are the implications of that?
Yeah, those are all really good questions, and you talked about the barrier. Like, how do you? What kind of barrier are we up against? Trying to accept this different way of thinking, and this is where we fall back into the religious and I guess theological problems that these things imply. And one of the big problems is that, you've used multi-trillion-dollar equipment and sensors and studies over the course of however many years in order to arrive at this conclusion. Very sophisticated, lots of PhDs, lots of extremely intelligent, brilliant individuals, just geniuses to formulate this new worldview, this system, right? But it was also part of our indigenous heritage, probably for the majority of our existence on this planet. This worldview, something similar to it, not the exact same, but this idea, going all the way back to ancient shamans and even Saint Paul and all these different individuals who they would come and they would say, all right, so this is the meaning of life. This is how life has a purpose. The universe is created. There is a creator. Now you got to do these things to get right with him. Well, they didn't have access to any of that technology. So we need to update our idea of where, what information is valuable and what isn't. Because, like you're saying, there's not a dichotomy between science and religion. There's just the biggest dichotomy is between truth and lies. So there can be truth and lies in religious systems and within science too. But we really need to start looking at what a lot of those guys were saying, and start thinking we don't have the whole enchilada. So obviously, I think we've talked on the show about the fact that sometimes in order to prove your faith, you have to abandon your faith. That on some level, that's a good and healthy thing to do. And we're a pretty faithless civilization at this point, and there are still individuals who are attempting and to kind of carry out the original intentions of scientists, which was, greater freedom, human dignity, lots of cool new gadgets, more knowledge of the universe, and freedom from some of the tyrannies that have historically plagued mankind. But along the way, almost immediately from the outset, is just plagued by lies. All right, so now let's throw the baby out with the bathwater and throw away countless years of traditions and our own human instinct, our soul, our minds, our subjectivity, the purpose for existence. Let's just get rid of all of that. It makes perfect sense. Why not? All right, so we're going on a trip, honey. Let's just throw the kids out the window and we're going to Disney World. What are we going to do when we get to Disney World and we don't have the kids with us? Like, who cares? We'll figure that out when we get there. But it's such what we see is that we're not very rational. We're not very intelligent. And the many things that are good about it, our intelligence, they can't be left to develop in a vacuum of a more holistic and healthy way of living in the world. And so, for all of those individuals who for countless years have been saying that science proves God doesn't exist and prove that mankind is just mechanical and there's no reason to even think about these things and you're all just machines, that's it's understandable because you can't blame history really for being history. It is what it is. Antiquated beliefs occur in antiquated times, but at the same time, there is something about it to me that has always seemed criminally negligent when self-serving individuals will take that kind of a position and say those kinds of things about and spread these kinds of ideas to children, to children in high school, to children growing up, to adults, and to really take away the map, the compass of an entire society, and then just set them off and say, well, it's meaningless, and then expect that nothing is going to happen because, hey, nothing is going to happen. There can't be anything bad about it because you're all just mechanical losers anyways. So we'll just wind you up and let you fall. When all of a sudden you hit a wall that nothing can explain. So, just I'll get off my soapbox there for a second, but that's obviously there's something about our station in life, where we are at in the universe, that we're prey to that kind of that mode of being, that we're extremely vulnerable to lies, and we're extremely vulnerable to self-centered thinking, which is probably the biggest barrier that we have to adopting the mode of being, I guess, the other way of living that would open you up to these kinds of these potentials. This is kind of our fundamental sin, and why I say that we need, that it's a good idea to reevaluate some of these ideas that our ancestors have had. Like St. Paul, the idea of the fall, the idea of the original sin and necessary sin, that we have fallen into this sort of prison-like state where we live in a body of death that we are a victim of. In our own deepest inward sense, we can't do what we want to do. We are sort of trapped in this system, this machine, and we're kind of, and in many ways, we're powerless against it. That there is something that you need to have. When I'm not sure what it is, but you need to have some connection with other people, with a bigger, something more energetic, more intelligent, whether it's a group of people or something else. You need help, and you can't do it on your own. And that's like your ruby red slippers. That's what you've got. And I think, like you were saying, Alon, that here science is after all these years. Like, oh, wait, might have got it wrong, guys. We might have got it wrong. Not saying that all scientists believed that, but that there is here there's this billboard all of a sudden. And it's really unfortunate that the implications are really lost on all of us and on society because of all of these blockades that have been set up, all of these kinds of thought traps that have been set up, so that just you can't even begin to imagine that it even has implications, because you're just like, whatever, and the creationists again. Or, oh, great, so Yahweh did that, whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the necessary sin part, because that it wasn't in mind when I was thinking about some responses to some of these ideas that we've been talking about. Because the necessary sin thing, we did a couple shows on it, but just to remind people, like from Paul's perspective, according to Tim Ashworth's analysis of Paul's letters, the fall, like the story of Adam and Eve, is a story better called the story of necessary sin as opposed to original sin, because the idea is basically that the sinful state that humanity is in is necessary in order to learn and in order to grow. Without a fall into that sinful state, you just already know everything, and there's nothing to learn. There's no growth that is possible. There's no possibility for anything meaningful or new to come out of that. Because imagine if you're just born knowing everything with nothing to accomplish, your life would be completely meaningless. It would just be a static, like nothingness. There'd be nothing to it. So there's something about the nature of our limitation that is necessary and potentially liberating. This relates back to what I was saying about the nature of choice. One way I've kind of formulated it is that the state that we find ourselves in, or the state that anything finds themselves in, is a state of limited options designed for growth. So within your state with your limited options available, you can do certain things and learn certain things, like from the bottom up. So going back to what we're saying about subatomic particles, they have very limited possibilities, very limited options. Then you have animals who are able to do a bit more. Your dog is able to do a lot more than a proton, and to learn a lot more too. Dogs and all kinds of pets, for instance, have an amazing capacity to learn certain things, and seemingly to develop some qualities that we would even associate with humanity. When you say a person is humane, broadly speaking, there are certain qualities attached to that we can see reflected in animals. Maybe not chimps, but we even as humans, even though, as I was describing it earlier, as extremely complex beings, we have extremely expanded possibilities. From another perspective, we are still extremely limited. Because if we think back to the talk with John Buchanan and about process philosophy, and with Jim Carpenter's first sight theory, it seems that the nature of consciousness is such that at any given moment, we have the entire universe entering into our mind. Our mind is the entire universe, essentially. But the vast majority of that is closed off to us. We don't have access to it. We have access to this completely, almost infinitesimally small slice of reality. That's the limited nature of what we have for our own experience and growth. And because in order to experience and in order to growth, it needs to be limited. Again, just like if we were born with all accomplishments already made and knowing everything, our life would be static. If we had access to everything, we would have nothing to do, because we would have no room for action, no room for discovery, no room for growth and change. Everything would be static because it's all there all the time. There's no interaction because everything already is and is constantly in relationship to everything else in the same static way. There needs to be a limitation in order for there to be dynamism and movement and life in the universe. So when you look at any given human, we're talking about all these barriers to understanding and barriers to a new worldview. Well, another way of looking at it from the other angle is that everyone on the planet, no matter what they believe, has that worldview, that mindset for a specific purpose. And that's what they have to work with. So this gets back to what I was saying about psi and the nature of belief in relation to psi. One of the essential points to first sight theory is, and not just first sight theory, but also the understanding of subliminal perception and subliminal responses and behaviors is the importance of implicit values and implicit goals. These are the values and goals that you're not even consciously aware that you have. It might be the implicit goals that your body has, and so your body will do things that you're unaware of for its own reasons, that you have no idea why it's doing it, but there's something going on. And one of the tricky things about that is that, to give a hypothetical example, let's say you're in a psi experiment and you think you believe in psi. Well, maybe for some unconscious reason, on some implicit level, you don't, and that's what causes you to psi miss, to actually not demonstrate a positive psi effect. Well, so how do you square that then? It's like, well, how do you change if you want to, presumably, how do you change your implicit values? Well, there's probably that's probably a whole other direction we could go into sometime in the future. But for what all of that I'm saying implies for me is that on some unconscious level, and this could be on a higher level, this could come from some kind of spiritual level that we exist at that we're not aware of. We have basically our own goals and plans for ourselves and what we will learn and what we will experience and how we will grow, and that we don't necessarily have total control over that. Well, we don't have total control over that. So in essence, on some level, our choices are limited for us, whether it's a higher part of ourselves or something else. That kind of like gives the options for how we're going to be navigating our lives. And tying that into another thing I said, the more we learn, and the more possibilities we have, maybe either the more we can fulfill that implicit goal, or the more we can actually change an implicit goal and choose one that we think might be more advantageous for us, something that we actually do want. Because we might want something on some level, as a teenager, you want certain things, and I'm sure if you do psychological tests on the subliminal responses, you'll show that teenagers want certain things that they're not going to want 10, 20, 30 years later. Their value system is going to change as they grow. And so we might see like humanity in its current state. We might see humanity with its current worldview that lacks meaning as a kind of like primitive, like teenager mentality or worldview. And if it's part of our implicit goals to change ourselves and to grow and develop in ways that we haven't previously, then that requires like growing up, right? It requires looking at a wider range of things in the world and becoming aware of new possibilities to then form a more expansive, comprehensive, and coherent worldview about what is going on and what the possibilities are. And when you think that's one of the reasons I like process philosophy so much, is because even though it's a system, it's and who knows, it's probably incorrect in numerous ways, but as what I consider kind of the pinnacle of the Western philosophical options for the nature of reality, it is pretty expansive in the possibilities that it opens up for the nature of reality and what can happen within it. Just to briefly mention something we didn't get a chance, I was planning on it, but I didn't get the chance to ask John Buchanan about it. One of the things he talks about in his paper is that it allows, for instance, for the existence of purely spiritual beings. And that might be controversial even within process philosophy, because as John was telling us, before we did the show, there are totally atheistic process philosophers and totally materialist process philosophers, and then it ranges all the way to guys like Charles Hartshorne and John Cobb, who are totally like spiritual religious process theologians. But the system that you create for yourself or that you acquire, however, can, and I think, should, if it's your goal, open up broaden your horizons, open up your possibilities, what you see about the world, to then open up possibilities for yourself. And then one aspect of that might be what you were mentioning, Corey, like, or at least alluding to, like a new method or a new source of information on which to kind of guide your life, as opposed to just like science and technology, for instance. There's other kinds and other sources of information. and that can be like the guys you were mentioning, like the great kind of like religious geniuses and mystics of our human heritage. And we can even try to look at them objectively and kind of separate the wheat from the chaff and say, okay, well, that's obviously, influenced by the time and place he was living in. Certain, like when you're reading the letters of Paul and he's talking about the, being raised up to the third heaven and seeing certain things. Well, that's part of the worldview of the time. One of the first things I said in this show, chances are the more specific you are about any particular belief system, the more likely you are to be wrong. Well, there's the world probably isn't structured in exactly the way that any of these given mystics described it, like even Ibn Arabi and the way he describes the levels of the heavens. Well, there might be some reality to what he is saying, but it would require a kind of a vast project of analysis and comparison of all these different systems and of whatever we can see and discover to kind of figure out what's there and what's not there.
Well, one idea that came to mind as you were describing all that was neuroplasticity. So neuroscientists, neurologists have discovered with people who are suffering from Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or some form of brain damage, is that when people exercise their minds in a certain way, when they meditate, for instance, or when they focus on those abilities that they've lost, they have a neuroplastic potential to grow their minds, literally, to make up for whatever physical deficiencies have been discovered by the doctor, which implies quite a lot, because if we take this idea of neuroplasticity to a psycho-spiritual plasticity, to the idea that the mind can grow out of its all the harm, all the programs, all the trauma, all the dogma that it's been subject to over a lifetime, which is quite a lot, then it suggests the potential to grow in ways that can be quite unexpected. Getting back to first sight theory, I mean, and Jung and at his best, and a number of other thinkers, where does intuition come from? Where does certain inspiration come from? Certain creative acts. I mean, these things, at least to my rational mind, are novel, are quite unexpected and inexplicable to me. So is there, because I believe in neuroplasticity, because I believe that there's a non-physical reality, because I believe that there is a divine or greater or cosmic mind, because I believe that there is a hierarchy of creativity and intelligence and order in the universe? Is it because I believe those things that I sometimes have flashes, in rare instances, granted, of something that to me is inexplicable? It's at least a question in my mind. And occasionally I find in a lot of what we read the suggestion of what may possibly be the answer or the reason for this larger scope of perception that pops into my noodle when I least expect it, and it's quite lovely. Am I saying any of these things with certainty? No. However, I think that the openness to, as you were saying earlier, Harrison, the openness to the possibility is what allows for a greater possibility or probability for any kind of ability or awareness or perception, and we just keep asking questions. We don't even have to pursue this with any amount of dead certainty. We can be, like I was saying earlier, we can be curious like children. We can apply our innocent, sincere questioning to all of these ideas and see what sticks, and be prepared to revise it later. But in the meantime, I think there are certainly these really valid tracts of inquiry that we can allow ourselves to pursue, and that even connecting our minds to the substance of the questions, to the thought processes that these guys like Whitehead and Peterson and these other thinkers have presented for us, to connect our thoughts to theirs. Is it's maybe a little bit of a rope. It's a little bit of a helping hand. It's a connection to that informational substance that they have already followed the path on, that they have already worked their way through to some degree, that we can follow for as long as it makes sense to us until we've decided we don't believe it, or we've outgrown it. We've gone along with it as much as it has allowed for our own expansion and expansiveness.
Yeah, those are really excellent points, and it makes me think about. I've been reading a book called The Moral. What was it called? Dang it, the America's Revolutionary Mind, and it's all about the revolution, the American Revolution, and the ideas that were in it. And one of the big ideas is on liberty, and liberty was considered as a method. It was a method of living your life. It was predicated that on the fact that you as an individual had this faculty, reason, that made you a sovereign citizen, a sovereign individual, that your body was your property, and that by extension people should not be, the governments and others should not be able to violate you, and that you had this obligation towards others too, that you should not be violating other individuals and their sovereign self. But this faculty of the reason was the most important part, right? This is where the rubber hits the road, because you have to look at your motives, and you have to look at what you want to do, and you have to analyze what you're doing, and you have to decide whether or not it is a noble path to pursue. And you have to be very cognizant of who you are and what you're doing and what your aims are and what your motivations are. And yet then, once you do that, then you're free to go and explore the universe, right? That's how that was the dream, really, of what a free society would look like, as individuals who control themselves and don't violate one another, but that are free to explore themselves and to live out their potential to the best that they possibly can, within a system that was based on checks and balances, and then it immediately became corrupted. But at the same time, there is within that, you can see this dream, that dream of freedom, right? It's in the context of what we're discussing here, it's not just a dream. It sounds like it's like a promise. It's a promise from God that humanity has always yearned for. Is this freedom, and then also to know that there are things that you are required to do in order to exercise this freedom. That there are requirements, spiritual. There's a spiritual way, a practice that you have to adopt in order to be able to actually be a free individual, and not just freely walk off a cliff to your own, demise. That, like you're talking about, Harrison, with this tiny sliver, right, that we have of this this vast consciousness and this very creative force that we see evidence of all around us. The sheer abundance of forms and interesting little life forms, and suns, supernova, everything. Just this a vast artwork of creativity that we have somewhere within us, a tiny sliver of that. Right. Well, it seems to me like it would be a worthwhile endeavor to see if you can access more of that. That in one lifetime, how much of that brilliance and creativity can you channel onto the planet? I mean, it does. To me, that seems like the the ideal behind being like a child of God, and to treat yourself like you're a child of God is how can I display this creative aspect of the cosmos in the unique and subjective a way as I possibly can. That's not asking for too much, right? I don't want to be like build Versailles, again, but it seems to me like it's a very interesting idea to take to heart is this potential, right? That's what we don't have. We might have something like it, but it's very silly. This idea that you can, be anything that you want to be, but it's like it's not really grounded in reality, and you can be a millionaire. You can be, yeah. It's not grounded in virtue, I guess. It's not grounded in a creative spirit. It's more or less like, oh, you can be a millionaire, like you said, or like you want to become an NFL player, like just like the kinds of things that you're setting yourself up for failure if you believe in them. But can I be more creative? Can I solve the problems that I have? Right? That's a big one in and of itself. Can I creatively solve my problems to make my life better, and then by extension make somebody else's life around me better? Like I would imagine if this is true, if what we're saying, if you have that kind of an intention, and we do have that kind of a connection to this divine cosmic mind, that there would be some form of help that you would receive, whether it was internally or from without, that you wouldn't be left on your own devices if you took a step in that direction, if you put that signal out, if you were the source of that information on this planet. Because we've been talking about God as like a single self, right? As this single self, but in this cosmology that we've been discussing, process philosophy especially, is that you are God, that you are an aspect of God, and that how I treat you is how I'm treating God. And then how you're treating me is also, I mean, if you're asking me to punch you in the face and I punch you in the face, I'm not going to feel bad for punching God in the face, not if you actually asked for me to do it. But that to know that like how you are with other people, right? Like God is your witness there. And that, I mean, went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I don't want to punch you. So, but
Thank
anyhow, other than that, I think that we are going to call that a show, and we hope that you enjoyed our discussion on some of the implications behind intelligent design, and we hope you have a good, nice weekend. Take care.
Bye-bye.